As a land-grant institution, the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign has a responsibility to acknowledge the historical context in which it exists. In order to remind ourselves and our community, we begin with this statement. We are currently on the lands of the Peoria, Kaskaskia, Piankashaw, Wea, Miami, Mascoutin, Odawa, Sauk, Meskwaki, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chickasaw nations. It is necessary for us to acknowledge these native nations and for us to work with them as we move forward as an institution. Over the next 150 years, we will be a vibrant community inclusive of all our differences, with Native peoples at the core of our efforts.
Welcome to the 17th Annual Goldstick Family Lecture in the study of communication disorders. This lecture is made possible each year by the generosity of Philip and the late Beverly Goldstick. Again this year, we have pivoted and adapted quickly to the disruption and uncertainty caused by the global pandemic. The College of Education has met the pandemic's challenge over the last 18 months and has largely turned them into growth opportunities. Today, we welcome over 400 participants from across the country to this virtual lecture to learn from leading scholars in the field of special education. This annual lecture would not be possible without the vision and generosity of the Goldstick family. When a need was identified, they chose to make a difference by giving students, scholars, and practitioners opportunities for personal and professional growth. Thank you to Phil and the entire Goldstick family for the generous support you have shown the College of Education community over the past 17 years.
Thank you everyone for joining, and thank you to Phil, Karen, Gail, and Goldstick family for the commitment and dedication to the work we do in the area of communication disorder. It is my pleasure and honor to be titled the Goldstick Scholar and to get to know your family over the years. We were hoping to meet this year in person, but the safety of everyone is our top priority. I hope the next year we can celebrate this wonderful event in person. I'm sure that this year's annual Goldstick Family Lecture will be interesting and engaging as in past year. More than 17 years ago, Phil and Beverly Goldstick established a fund in the College of Education and the Department of Special Education in honor of their granddaughter, Marisa, who has Rett syndrome, a genetic disorder that affects the development and use of language, as well as many other areas functioning. Phil and Beverly wanted their gift to impact the future of children and young adults like Marisa. And now I would like to introduce Brad Zellinger, the brother of Marisa and grandson of Phil and Beverly Goldstick, and the founder and CEO of Stride Autism Center, to give a few remarks.
Thank you, Hada. I appreciate the introduction, and it's really wonderful to be able to say just a couple of things here before we get started. Like Hada said, I am the founder of Stride Autism Centers. We're a provider of applied behavior analysis therapy to preschool children with autism. We are in Illinois, Iowa, and Nebraska. We specifically are focused on underserved communities, those that have the most acute need for the services that we provide, which is why we've located in some Midwest states without a lot of access to care. My grandparents, as Hada noted, Phil and Beverly Goldstick, endowed this lecture series due to their interest in promoting growth within the field of communication disorders, and that interest that they have stems from my sister, Marissa, their granddaughter, who has Rett syndrome, an autism-related disorder. And I really think it's safe to say that Marissa, despite being nonverbal, has really made a dramatic impact in the world. She certainly has shaped my world and inspired me to found Stride and to do a range of other things that benefit families like my own. And I'm really motivated by Stride's mission to support, at the earliest possible moment, children with autism and their families, to give them more opportunity to lead independent and joyous lives. And I think it's interesting, I was thinking last time I spoke, I think Stride might have just started our first clinic. We now have we'll finish this year with 10 clinics in 3 states. And I definitely get a lot of my energy to push this organization forward from my sister and my grandparents, demonstrating, the importance of kind of giving back to the community. The last thing is just, really honored also to speak just prior to this really important topic. I know that at Stride, we focus on driving really rapid increases in meaningful skills for children so they can graduate into kindergarten and first grade programs with a greater chance of flourishing. And we think a lot about that transition, but I think more needs to be done in school once they're at those new environments that may not be, tailored as tightly as they should be to those children's needs. So this topic today, I think, will focus on that. And I know many of my team members are on this line who will benefit from listening. And so thank you. And I look forward to learning more.
Thank you, Brad. I think, you mentioned last time, you just mentioned the centers, and now you already have quite a few of them. And I think your journey is inspiring and continue the path that your grandparents and your parents started. So thank you for all your work you do in behalf of individuals with disability and families. Each year, the Goldstick family support doctoral students who receive the title of Goldstick Fellows. I'm pleased to announce this year's recipient, 5 doctoral students from the Department of Speech and Hearing Science and the Department of Special Education, all who have strong interest in communication disorder and disability. Nikki Donnelly, Daniela Fanta, Rebecca Folkerts, Emily Maloff, and Kaori Tiro. Congratulations to all of you. In addition to the Goldstick Fellowship, the Goldstick family fund the Marisa Zellinger Research Award. This award is designed to enhance the research mission of the Department of Special Education and to contribute to the scholarly literature on topics relevant to Rett syndrome. This year, recipients are Dr. Jessica Hardy and doctoral student Kaori Tiro, who will explore teacher perspective on teaching math to preschooler with disability. Jessica and Kaori, congratulations. Finally, the Goldstick family generosity allow us to host a lecture every year and invite well-known scholars to the University of Illinois. I would like to thank the Goldstick family for the opportunity to bring another highly regarded scholar to share her expertise with us. Professor Connie Kasari is this year's Goldstick annual lecture speaker. He is a distinguished professor of human development and psychiatry at the University of California, Los Angeles. Dr. Kasari has been a faculty at UCLA since 1990, where she teaches both graduate and undergraduate courses and has been the advisor of more than 70 doctoral students. And actually today she told me it's more than 70. So we all appreciate that and understand the work that go into that. She's a founding member of the Center for Autism Research and Treatment at UCLA and leads several large multi-site studies, including Network on Intervention for Minimally Verbal School-Age Children with Autism, a network that aims to increase equity in access to intervention for children with disability. She received numerous awards and honors, and she is on the Science Advisory Board of the Autism Speaks Foundation and regularly presents to both academic and practitioner audiences locally, nationally, and internationally. The title of Professor Kasari talk is Children with Autism and Other Developmental Disability at School, Inclusion, Integration, and Improvement. Following the presentation, Professor Kasari will respond to questions which you can submit throughout the presentation through the question and answer feature in Zoom. I also want to remind everyone that you can use the live transcript throughout the presentation, and the presentation will be recorded and available after it is done. So please join me in welcoming this year's speaker, Professor Connie Kasari.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, whatever we are up to at this point. Let's see. I hope I can share screen. Yes, I can. Okay, good. Okay, good afternoon. I believe it's afternoon there. So I really want to thank you for the opportunity to give this lecture. I'm so impressed that this is the 17th year. It's pretty amazing. And especially that you've been funding the pipeline of professionals who are going to go on and work in neurodevelopmental disorders. I think that's really important, and I got to talk with a lot of them this morning. And I feel really positive about the future. I think it's in good hands. So as Hedda said, I'm going to talk about children with autism at school, mostly in inclusive settings. And, you know, Brad, I think this is, I came to this topic after working in preschool education and early interventions for a while and realizing that all the gains we made in early intervention sometimes fall apart when kids go to school, and that we need to think about this, you know, new and different environment and what needs to happen for kids in school. So first, a disclosure statement. A lot of the studies that I'm going to be talking about today were funded through grants by the NIH, IES, and HRSA. And in recognition of all of the work that you've done in supporting graduate students and fellows, I want to also recognize my students who've collaborated on the studies I'll talk about today. So all of these graduate students are now in academic positions. And so again, the future's in good hands. I'm going to start off with this quote that I love, because I think it says a lot about where we are in terms of the field of neurodevelopmental disorders, and particularly in working in schools. So there are known knowns. There are things that we know, and there are known unknowns. That is to say, there are things that we know we don't know, but there are also the unknown unknowns. And these are the things we don't even know we don't know. And that is the future. So I think all of the people I met this morning who are just starting out on their careers are going to figure out what some of those unknown unknowns are. This talk today is going to be about a very specific group of students. Mostly they have autism, because that has been my focus, but they're applicable to other developmental delays as well, because schools are, you know, all kids go to school. And so there's a lot of heterogeneity amongst the students in a classroom. Most of the kids in these studies are verbal, and they're included students. And that happens to be the majority of school-age children with autism and other developmental disabilities. So most kids can go into an inclusive settings. It doesn't always work. And, you know, we have lots of people who are working on better inclusive models, including some of the fellows I talked to this morning. So what do we know about school and the experiences of individuals who've experienced recess? So we have a lot of knowledge about school recess experiences from highly verbal adolescents and adults, and these are mostly neurodiverse individuals, and they often will reflect back on their experiences. So this is an old video, let's hope it works, of an adult who got diagnosed when she was in her 20s, when her little brother got diagnosed with autism. And this is just the piece of her interview talking about recess, and then some adolescents also talking about recess.
So for me, the playground, the point was, well, the cafeteria is hell. So you eat lunch as fast as you can to get out there as fast as you can so you can get a space to be by yourself. Get on the swing and start swinging, because while you're swinging as high as you can, one, you have rhythmic movement that's very soothing, and two, you don't have to deal with anybody.
I mean, for me, I had such a hard time in the learning and everything that I really wasn't really on the yard that much.
So you didn't even go out to play?
I tried, but it sometimes, and a lot of times ended in a conflict or with me, you know, not knowing, you know, because I don't know what the best thing was to do in certain situations.
Right.
So, like, if someone might try to be friends with me, I might not try to be friends back with them, and try to, you know, I've done something that might have seemed like I was trying to be enemies with them.
Well, when you were out on the yard, so you mostly talked with your friend, did you guys ever play any games together?
No.
No?
Very rarely.
Very rarely. If there was ever a game you played, do you remember trying?
Not really. We attempted to stay out of games as much as we can.
Why did you say, it sounds like you were trying not to play them.
Exactly.
Why is that?
I don't really know. We weren't the physical game, and I don't really like games like that.
Okay, so I think we have to recognize differences between adult recollections and children going through it. So each of those individuals had kind of different perspectives on recess. None of them were very positive. And there are definitely verbal ability differences. So some individuals with neurodevelopmental disabilities can talk about their experiences and others cannot. There's also a difference between someone recollecting their experience and those who are going through it. So these are two little guys that were in an early intervention program of mine. They both did great. While they, as preschoolers, they were around 60 IQ, so they were delayed in their development. But now as third graders, they have, typical IQ, they're in inclusion. And both mothers asked us to do something about recess and their ability to interact with peers. So the first little guy these are both from the ADOS. So this is a standardized diagnostic assessment where we ask about, whether you tease kids, whether other kids tease you, and so on. So here's the first little guy.
Do you get along good with the kids at school?
Yeah.
Yeah. Are there sometimes things that they do that make you mad or irritate you?
No.
No? Pretty good. Do kids ever tease you?
No.
Do you ever tease kids?
No.
Oh, okay, good.
So what do you think? Right? Do you think he understands his situation? He's telling us that it's all fine. His mother, on the other hand, is telling us that he's being bullied at school and she's concerned about it. So this little guy is kind of unaware of his situation. He's kind of blissfully oblivious. So here's another guy, third grader, also included.
Were you ever teased or bullied at school?
I think so, but not really. I think so. Maybe a long time ago. Maybe, I don't know.
You don't remember?
No. Yeah, no. I don't. Not even bullied. I never saw that bullied.
Mhm. Do you ever try to change things so that other people won't tease you?
Yeah, but it doesn't work.
It doesn't work?
Yeah.
What have you tried?
I tried being nice to them, trying to be happy and do stuff that I'm supposed to do when bullies are bullying me or something. But it doesn't always work.
It doesn't always work?
Yeah.
Does it work sometimes?
Yeah, sometimes.
Oh, okay, good.
So this mother also reports that he's being bullied at school, but in this case, he's kind of aware of the situation, but he doesn't have very good strategies for dealing with bullies. Like I wouldn't encourage him to go along with what bullies are trying to get him to do. So there's a lot of variability in how children experience their situations, as you can see from just these two boys. And interventions need to consider those experiences because we should intervene differently for what they understand, but often interventions do not. We tend to offer the same intervention to everyone. So I think it's important to ask children themselves and to observe them in natural environments. And this isn't done as often as it needs to be in intervention studies. So today I want to talk a little bit about what intervention targets could be in a school setting. I'll give you some examples of modular intervention examples. These are like kind of tight, just simple interventions. And then I'll talk a little bit about how we can personalize those interventions and try to get them sustained in a school setting. So a known is that social communication and behavioral difficulties among kids are variable. Some kids find it difficult to interact with peers and develop friendships. Some kids have poor adaptation to social situations in the moment. And some kids have trouble managing the multiple demands that come at them in school. But it's also important to remember that not all children who are identified with some condition have social impairment and need an intervention or the intervention that you have in mind. So that's also important. But there are lots and lots of programs out there. So many that you probably can't even count them all. Most of these interventions, at least for autism and for some other neurodevelopmental disorders, are going to address social and communication difficulties. The interventions themselves may or may not be tested, but more importantly, the majority of them probably are not applicable to the school context, and that's a problem. So what do you do? So the first thing is that you can't underestimate the importance of a good assessment. So a known about, especially kids with autism, is that you need multiple measures, that children are different across context and by reporter. For example, if we think about parent report about their children's social behavior on the recess, the playground, it's a problem because parents typically are not at school, so they're not there to observe. Teacher report can also be problematic in that teachers, especially general education teachers, are not on the playground, so they may not know. Self-report by itself could be problematic just because children may or may not understand what their situation is, as you saw with the two little boys. And then finally, if we do observations of children on the playground, those tend to be limited in time and scope. So any of these measures by themselves may only give us one slice of what's going on and not the full picture. So it's complicated. We probably need multiple measures to try to figure out what's really going on. Let me give you a couple of examples of measures we've used in our research. First, we ask kids about their situation, and we ask the classmates that they have about how the connections in the classroom work. So we give a friendship survey. This is based on Karen's work out of University of North Carolina. So we ask kids, are there kids in your class that you like to hang out with? Who are they? Tell me your 3 best friends. Tell me about kids that you don't like to hang out with. And then tell me about kids in your class who hang out together, like on the playground. Remember to put boys and girls and yourself in those groups. From this simple survey, we get friendship nominations, like how many kids nominate a child and how many of the child nominates other kids as their friend. You can find out if there's reciprocity. So for example, if I nominate Hedda as my friend and she nominates me as her friend, then, we're reciprocal friends in the class. And importantly, we can find out sort of who connects to whom in the class itself. And that gives us information. Oh, here's an example of the survey filled out by a 6-year-old. So you can see that they might not list all of the kids in the class, but when you have all of the kids in the class giving you information, if you have at least half of the class, you get a sense of how that class is connected. And we can draw these social network maps. So here's an example of a map. And you can see that in blue, we have a couple of isolated kids. Of course, Connie's always isolated. And then the little guy, Sam, has autism, and he's connected to his friend, Aubin. But from this map, we can figure out who is tightly connected, sort of central in the class, or what some people would say popular in the class. Those kids who are more on the outskirts or peripheral. And from doing this kind of work, so I've now done this work in like hundreds, maybe 300 to 400 kids with autism in inclusive classrooms with their typical classmates. So thousands of typical kids. And what we find over and over consistently, some of our kids with autism are popular. So you'll see the black bar are the typical classmates matched on characteristics to kids with autism. So yes, kids with autism are less often popular, but some are. The majority of kids with autism are what we call peripheral. They're kind of hanging on to one kid, or they're on the edge of a group. And as Sam sort of illustrated in that map. So how do those kind of self and peer reports align with our observations? And I'll come back to this when I actually give you some intervention studies. So we do code interactions during recess. We're particularly interested in engagement states. So what's the duration of time that a child stays connected with other kids in conversation or in a game? And then what are the initiations and responses of children to each other? And we use this very brief playground observation of peer engagement. So we'll do a 15-minute observation. It's important to do it more than once in a week so that you kind of get a flavor of what's really going on. So when we do that, and we've compared typical classmates and children with autism in the same class, we match them on gender, classroom, grade, age, and ethnicity. We find that kids with autism are kind of solitary, meaning they're not really engaged with peers and they're not engaged in really any activity about 30% of the time. But 40% of the time, they're jointly engaged with other kids in conversation or in games. That's different, of course, from the typical classmates who are 9% solitary and 70% jointly engaged. I think an important point here is that typical children are not engaged 100% of the time during recess. There is variability. So we will see this variability amongst all of the kids in class. So that's important. And you can see here on these bars, this is joint engagement, and this is solitary. So what do we take away from just sort of measurement? So it's critical. It's likely that you need multiple measures, that you shouldn't rely on just one. And you need to consider differences in girl and boy social behavior. So we've done studies on girls versus boys. I'm not going to really talk about those today, but you can ask me. And there are some considerations to think about. And then importantly, not all children require an intervention. Just because you have a diagnosis doesn't mean that, that you do. So for us, we assess how much kids are engaged before we start an intervention. And if they're at the same level of engagement on the playground as their typical classmates in that school, they probably don't need intervention. Okay, so what do we learn from intervention studies? So a known, right, is that children with developmental disabilities, especially autism, often have social difficulties at school. So it's that social emotional learning that's so important, and that doesn't get as much attention, of course, as academics and so on. But a known unknown is how do we best intervene or personalize that intervention for the best outcome for children. So the most common interventions for children with autism in schools, at least in my world, are a paraprofessional aide, sometimes called a shadow teacher. So this goes for any child with a developmental disability, regardless. Parents often want a shadow teacher. And the other common intervention is to have kind of a buddy system in elementary school, or a Confederate sort of ambassador program, kids who are looking out for other kids on the playground to help them. And in secondary schools, it's more likely to be a mentor. So we did a first study a number of years ago, kind of thinking about those common interventions and whether we could test those to see what would be more beneficial. So this was a study of about 60 children with autism. They all had above 65 IQ. So they were verbal. They were able to do the academic work for the most part, fully included. They were first through fifth graders. And our outcome measure was that network. So we wanted to move kids into more connected, so from peripheral or solitary or isolated into more joint engagement. And we situated the study in schools. This was back in the day. So this was, I think, in 2003 we started it. And so the schools didn't let us train teachers. but they allowed us to come in and do the intervention. So this was researchers doing the intervention, and we compared a child-assisted approach where we worked one-on-one with a child on their social difficulties versus a peer-mediated approach. I'll talk about those. So the child-assisted approach was where we observed the child on the playground. We got teacher reports, peer networks, self-reports, and then we determined the top 3 problems for that child to engage with their peers at school. And we worked on those one at a time. We hypothesized that this was because, we knew best, right? Because we were getting all this information that we were going to help kids actually change their networks. And we compared that to just 3 peers from the class. They were, this did not involve the child with autism at all. And we had the peers identify kids who were having difficulty on the playground. And then we had the peers generate ideas to help the kids on the playground who were having trouble engaging. So the study design was a 2x2. So child versus peer versus just inclusion versus child and peer, but never together. We were never allowed to identify the target child. So we never talked about autism. And the treatment itself was only 6 weeks, 12 sessions with a 3-month follow-up. So we're talking a very brief intervention. And this was our outcome measure, right? Social networks. And so what did we learn? Well, we learned that intervening with the peers made the most difference in engaging those kids with autism. And so that was peers, whether it was the combo or whether it's just peers alone. And so you can see from time 1 to time 2, which is 6 weeks, the dotted line are wherever peers are involved, that made a difference. And the child assisted, where we had the expert adult working on the issues, which we hypothesized to be the best, was not. It was no different than inclusion. And the 3-month follow-up, so we went away. In fact, some kids even changed classes over the summer. They would go to a new class. It went down a little bit, but it was still better than baseline. So kids were able to maintain some of those skills. So to illustrate what we were looking for is in this example, this is a 2nd grade girl. She's E5. We take away names and identify kids by letters and numbers. So E5 was isolated in the beginning. She got the peer mediated intervention. And you can see here at time 2, 6 weeks later, when the kids do the maps, she's connected, and we come back in 3 months and she's still connected to a group. We also learned some other things. So we found that the number of received friend nominations was higher for those peer-mediated interventions. So what that means is that the other kids in the class were nominating that child with autism as a friend more often at the end of intervention. The kids were also less isolated on the playground. And we had done those observations every week. So this is, 6 times we watched, and we had blinded observers on the playground. They didn't know which intervention the child was in. And then teachers rated social skills better in the classroom for those kids who got the peer-mediated intervention. And teachers also didn't necessarily know what treatment condition the children were in, because they weren't involved in the treatment. But there were limits. So when you connect those observations to self and peer report, they don't always measure up. So we found that if a child on the baseline map was connected to other kids, they might have even had a reciprocated friend in the class. When we looked at them on the playground, they were no more involved than kids who didn't have a reciprocated friend. And so it led us to think about where you situate an intervention. And it's likely that we would need, to change where we situated that. So what we can take away from this study is that peers matter. We need to think about girls and boys differently because they do interact somewhat differently. Change is possible, but we have to consider that really where that intervention needs to be placed is on the playground. So in the study I just talked about, we actually took kids aside for like 15 minutes for the intervention and then sent them out to the playground. It wasn't situated on the playground. So that led us to another study. So the second study was a playground specific intervention. And the adult that you saw in the very first video I showed you named this intervention. So she said, we just need to remake intervention or remake recess. And so that's what we called the intervention. And in this case, we are teaching the paraeducators on the yard to do the intervention. So we teach them about how to start games, what to look for, how to, start something and then fade themselves out, how to facilitate peer conversations, how to deal with things like conflict mediation, communication, social engagement, and flexible thinking. And importantly, how to assess when a child is in need of support. So let me give you some simple strategies. They're so simple, but surprisingly, they're not often used. I've done a lot of observations on schools during recess, and it's surprising what doesn't happen. So here's an example of a simple strategy of transitioning. So when I talked about how some kids with a reciprocated friend in the class get out to the playground and they're isolated or not engaged. So one strategy is connecting kids when they leave classroom to go out to the playground, because most kids are getting ready to run out to the playground, get their favorite game, their space, to do whatever it is that they like to do. And sometimes our kids can get lost in that process. So here's an example of a simple strategy. And I'll let you decide if the kids have autism or not.
You may go, and I want you to have a conversation on the way about anything you want. But I want you two to have a conversation. You need to wait here.
This is the door
With
to
Oliver.
do.
Going to the dino yard for choice
time.
We're going to the dino yard for choice time, but
And then
Skylar, not you.
Then it's free play time, so we get extra time at the dino yard.
Choice time and free play are the same thing. Now you guys need to have a conversation about something and walk.
Do you want to see something funny? Do you want to see something funny? Power terminated. Do you know how to look it up? That's dangerous. Did you see that? Oh, yeah. Wasn't that funny? Power terminated. Yeah, every time I will. Oh, I like Iron Man. Iron Man's a big robot. That's so cool. Yeah, Iron Man's so cool. Superman. No wait, Iron Man and Superman both can fly. I know. But Superman has more powers. What? Don't run on me. Did you see me? I was like,
This little guy, typical classmate, right? So the little guy that's isolated is a typical classmate, and the other two guys actually both have autism, and you may not have picked that up. And so one thing is to get them to transition together so they end up together on the yard. We also think it's really important for leadership to get involved in these interventions. This happens infrequently, but we had this amazing principal who would do the intervention. And this, I'm going to show that class, that last school was the lab school. So it's high SES, and this is our typical LAUSD playground and population. So that's a typical cafeteria for us. They're always outdoors in LA. I bet that's different from you guys where you are. So the data for this, we did a pilot study where we were looking at just whether or not we could get kids more engaged. Again, a 6-week intervention, teaching aids on the yard. And the top line are those aides who got the immediate intervention or the training. And the bottom line are those who are waiting. And these are the kids. So this is the proportion of time that they're jointly engaged with their peers. And you can see that it goes up pretty rapidly just with, getting the aides involved and changing the environment for the kids. And then it maintains a follow-up. So short-term study, short-term follow-up. We've done a larger multi-site study, and these are my research partners, David Mandel and Trish Smith. And this was a larger study, 80 kids in inclusive settings, kindergarten through 5th, and mostly, low resourced Title I schools, because that's where we are. And you can see here where the outcome is the networks, not the playground observations. Actually, the playground observations didn't change, but the networks changed at follow-up. So not in the 6 weeks of the intervention, but on follow-up. So, a difference, an improvement on follow-up. So what do we take away? So paraprofessionals can make change in child's engagement on the playground and pretty rapidly. But studies have been uneven, sometimes improving observations by blinded observers and sometimes not. And it suggests that there's great variability day by day, or that some kids just need more intensive intervention than what these interventions offer. And so some kids are going to benefit from direct instruction. So in thinking about inclusion, there are a couple of things that we think about. One of them is propinquity. So theoretically, children are more likely to be friends with those that they have contact with. They have geographical compatibility. So for me, it's going to be hard for me to be a really good friend with somebody in Illinois because I'm not going to see you very often. We're, not co-located. And so this argues for inclusion, right? If you want kids to have friends that are typically developing, then, or from your neighborhood, then it argues for co-locating them in the same spot. And then homophily is that children will connect to other kids on common interests. So similar characteristics, age, gender, cultural background, or football. So Phil and I had a conversation about football, right? So the more I'm interested in football, the more we're going to connect over that common interest. So we then created a study where we contrasted an engaged group, which would be typical kids with a child with autism in the class. And the approach was based on interest. So we got the kids together and we asked them what they wanted to do, kind of like their own little club. So some kids played Pokemon and some kids wanted to do origami, or, it could be anything. And we contrasted that to what is usually done in clinics. So a skills group. These are kids with the same diagnosis. They come from different classrooms, maybe different schools, and the approach is very didactic. We're saying, this is how you start a conversation. This is how you keep a game going. And there's some practice in those skills group, but it is located away from the classroom itself. And you can think of it kind of as a lunch bunch at school. So this study also is published. It was a multi-site study, 3 sites, 137 kids, 120 classrooms. And we're contrasting that peer approach and the peer group. Again, a brief 20 minutes, 2 times per week for about 8 weeks. What did we find? I thought, given all that we knew in the field and everything people had told us, that the engaged group should be better. You've got homophily, you've got propinquity. But that's not what we found. We found that skills was more effective for improving that engagement on the playground, which is interesting because the kids in the skills groups were not even from the same class, which means that they weren't even on the playground at the same time. But what they gained were these skills in the kind of lunch bunch approach that they could then generalize to the playground. So very interesting. Whatever I hypothesize, we usually find the opposite effect. But we also found an important moderator where the teacher relationship was really important. If you had a good teacher relationship with the child, then that child did better in the engaged groups. If you had a poor teacher-child relationship, or you had higher rated behavior problems, you did better with that skills didactic group. So that makes sense. So what do we take away? So inclusion can be the right placement for lots of reasons. Children are likely to connect to other children who are like themselves. And this could be other kids with a disability. That's homophily. It could be, that's fine. And the issue is whether kids have access to each other, so propinquity. Whereas we thought the engaged groups had homophily and propinquity, we actually created that in our skills groups as well. Teacher support and relationship with the child is important. And again, gender is an important variable in those groups, especially with limited number of girls identified. So we would try to form girl groups versus boy groups, especially at the younger ages. Okay, last thing, personalizing interventions and sustaining them in schools. So what needs to happen to help all children in a school setting? So a known, there's heterogeneity in response to interventions. So we need to have a methodology, a way to test interventions where we can personalize, tailor, and target an intervention. And this really addresses for whom the intervention works and why it works. So I often think of a sequence of treatments where the adaptation is based on the child's response. We know that a single intervention isn't going to work for everybody, right? So we need to adapt that intervention so it works for that particular child. It's kind of like a diet, right? Different diets work for different people. And how long do you stick with that diet before you change something or add something in to make it effective? So I've been doing these adaptive intervention designs, which really are a way to systematize clinical practice. And I'm going to talk about this a bit more tomorrow in our research seminar. But the definition of this is a sequence of decision rules that specify whether, how, when, and based on which measures you might want to alter something, whether it's the dose, duration, frequency, amount, the type of intervention, or the delivery, or who delivers it, at different decision stages in the course of care. So that's a mouthful. It's a lot of different things to think about. And the more research component of adaptive treatment design is called a SMART design, which is the sequential multiple assignment randomized trial. And my partners in this have been Susan Murphy and Danny Almarell, who are the statisticians who really developed these methods. So this is the future, in my opinion. So it's kind of the known unknown. It's a research designed to personalize an intervention and to systematize what good clinicians do. And the reason you want to systematize it is because it's very hard to replicate something of an expert clinician. So we need these kind of decision rules to train new people coming into the field. So we did this kind of crazy design that you see in front of you as a pilot study to see if it was feasible and acceptable to school staff and to parents. So our thinking, and based on the studies that I've done, is that the first thing we need to do is to change the environment. And that's remaking recess. It's teaching the para-educators, it's making sure there are games and things available and kids have access to the kinds of things that will help them engage with their peers. So after that, we thought that everybody could use a step up in intervention. And so, well, yeah, I won't talk about too much of the detail. You can ask me if you're interested. And so here we're going to give either a parent-mediated intervention, which would be having parents at home learn how to have a successful play day, which a lot of our parents have asked for. Or we would give them the peer-mediated intervention at school. So everybody would get that, one or the other. And then we would test for response. If kids are more engaged with their peers after these two interventions, then they would just continue on. But if they weren't looking more engaged, then we would give them, it's kind of a bad term, a rescue, which means that we're just going to combine everything that we know in order to improve their outcome. So you can see the goal here is to really improve outcomes for all kids. Either they're going to do fine with the least amount of intervention, or we can give them more. But the fact is, some kids in school need very little intervention and some kids need a lot. And so we have to have a way of determining that. Okay, so we will have time for questions. A known is that we need a lot of different assessments given the variability of autism and other neurodevelopmental disorders. Interventions work the best in the context where you expect change. So on the playground or in the classroom. And then interventions always need to be adapted to the school culture. So I've done these interventions all over Los Angeles, Philadelphia, Rochester, and the games that kids play and the conditions that they're exposed to are quite variable. So in order to apply an intervention, you actually need to be present on that particular playground to know what the games are. We were amazed at the variety of games from one school to the next, which might be 5 miles apart. A known unknown is that while children need like multiple and often sequential interventions, the actual sequence isn't known. And so I think this is what our future research needs to look at. So which kids might need which sequence of interventions and how we can best maximize the outcome. And then the unknown is likely a lot of things. And I think the best thing for us is to keep an open mind and to think about those things so that we can apply them when the time comes. And if you want more information about any of the things that I've talked about today, you can go to the airbnetwork.org or my own website, CASLab. So thank you, and I'm happy to have some questions.
Well, thank you very much, Connie. This was very interesting, and I think we all learned a lot. And there's so many questions coming in. I don't think we'll be able to get all of them. Miki Ostrowski and myself wrote them, and we're going to read a few of them for you. And I know we will not be able to answer all of them, but we wrote all of them, we copied all of them. So maybe in a later time, you'll be able to address some of them. So I'll start with the first question. It's from Rebecca, and she asked, in school context, attempting recess-based intervention, I have experienced barriers of both motivation to implement and resources, actually manpower, to facilitate intervention on the playground. When generalizing this strategy to local school, have you experienced the same barriers? Or if so, what strategy was successful in overcoming them?
So is Rebecca a researcher or within the school? Because you can find barriers either way.
Yeah, she was a school teacher in Chicago Public School, and currently she's a Goldstick Fellow.
Oh,
a doctoral student.
Right. So, it matters whether you do it from the inside, which I always think is best, that we actually give the skills to the school personnel to take it on and to do it. And then they can figure out how to get around those barriers that we as researchers from the outside encounter. But the main thing is buy-in. Do they buy into it? Do they find the need for it? They don't need another thing like another, book on the shelf that's not useful. We're doing, so what we find actually, and what I didn't talk about because it's kind of new work, what we find is that these interventions that we do in the schools are not sustainable. They don't last. And why don't they? There's a lot of staff turnover. And so unless you have a champion for this kind of intervention, like Mr. Rumble is still doing it, you need a champion that's going to keep implementing pieces of it at least. And that's really hard to do. So what we're doing now with the AirB network and across 7 sites is an implementation strategy intervention. So we've already tested remaking recess. We know that it can be done and it works when it's done. But how do we get people to do it and sustain it? So we will be doing remote training of everybody that comes into the study on remaking recess. And then we have an and then half of the people will get the United intervention versus the other half who will not. And United is building a team at the school and having a good communication system for implementing that intervention. And we'll see if that works for sustaining something. I think it's a huge problem. There are barriers, and you have to get the administration involved. I used to give out coffee cards to principals and say, just go around and give it to a paraprofessional who's doing a good job. But then the principal would never go out on the playground. So again, you need buy-in.
Thanks, Connie. This is Mickey. Hi, nice to see you. This is a question from a graduate student who's part of someone's research lab. So she says, in light of criticism from the autistic self-advocate community about autism research broadly, our lab has recently had discussions about social validity and how to ensure that our work is valuable to the autism community. Can you speak about your experiences with this and measures you and your research teams have taken to connect to the autism community in meaningful ways?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yes, I've trained graduate students with autism who are part of this, actually. We have community advisory boards that involve parents of kids with autism and autistic advocates in the community, which are different from autistic researchers, but we've had both. And I think it's really important to listen. If you want to do something in autism, you kind of have to listen to the community. But I would counter a little bit with whose voice are we listening to? And when you say that, you know, they don't want intervention on social skills, that's true. Some don't need it. I agree with that. And some do need it. And we've certainly been asked by a lot of autistic individuals to do something at school. And you can see that our first line of defense is changing the environment, which is nothing to do with the kid with autism. It's all about, you know, making the environment accessible for kids. But I think it's really important to talk to the community at large. But there are a lot of voices, and you have to balance those voices.
Thank you. We have a lot of future teachers and speech language pathologists in the audience, many of our people, and people ask about practical strategy. So one person asked, what are some social inclusion strategies that school can or do use when it comes to children with autism? And more specifically, what specific strategy are differentiated by gender and by age group? So can you talk a little bit about this?
So age, always think about development and what kids understand, and the fact that kids play different games across different ages. Gender, girls are more likely to be persistent in groups. They will continue to go back to the group, and they will flit around and hover around groups. And if you're just scanning the environment, it may look like they're involved, but they may not be. So when you get up close, you may see a lot of rejection. Whereas boys tend to either join in. If they're rejected, they just, you know, leave. So they're more identifiable on the playground, actually, because they may be more isolated. So we have a few papers on girls, and, you know, they talk about camouflaging with the girls. My student, Michelle Dean, has done a lot of this work. It's a little controversial, camouflaging, because, of course, lots of people camouflage. Boys camouflage. People with other neurodiverse, you know, conditions also camouflage. We all camouflage in some way. So it's a little controversial, but there are some differences just in how kids socialize. Girls, first of all, you know, if you watch little girls, they're talking a lot. They're under the picnic table talking, where the boys are out playing, you know, a game of soccer. So their strategies are different. So in terms of strategies that we teach, first of all, you want to know what the games are on the playground. And I would spend time teaching the child the rules of the game and how to play the game if they don't know them. Or if you're observing, so I can tell you a story about a little boy in a school who loved to play Foursquare, that ball game I think I showed you with Mr. Rumble. And at that school, they had this funny little rule. The kids had created this thing called open windows. So when you're standing in line waiting for your turn, if there's a space between you and the next kid, somebody could cut in front of you. So this little boy never got in the game because he never wanted to press up close to the other kids. So we actually taught him, we desensitized this kid, taught him to close the window, so he got in the game. So that's a very specific intervention strategy that you wouldn't see at another school because they don't have that rule or they don't have that game. So the strategies really depend on you making those observations. And then, of course, starting games, fading out, knowing how to do that is important. Having access to different kinds of games that kids will want to play. Not everyone wants to be physical. Board games are okay. Card games are okay if your school allows it.
Okay, thanks. This question's from one of the faculty in our department asking about social networks, that when you analyze social networks, was it limited to the quantity of the connections, or did you also take into account quality, depth, or nuances of those connections? And if so, how did you measure that piece of it?
So this is the Cairns measure. It has a way of kind of looking at the intercorrelation matrix. It's not so easy to sort of analyze it, and it's looking at those connections and the numbers really of connections. That's why that measure alone doesn't necessarily give you the full picture of how connected kids are. So the observation, and in our studies, you know, the observations and the networks don't always match up. And that's interesting, right? So that is why we've had these different iterations of interventions. So what is going on? Are kids losing the other kids at recess because they seem connected on the networks, but they're isolated on the playground? Now, some people will say to us, the kids are really taxed academically. They just need a break. Let them run around, be alone, do their thing. I think that's okay, except that when we interview kids, they all say that they want to have friends and they don't know how to really, connect to the other kids. So I don't know that that's always the case.
That's interesting because we've done some research around motor development and thinking about outside, and the same thing that, unstructured versus structure. Some children want unstructured, but some children would love someone to help set up a game that they could play. So again, the individualization.
Yeah. And I have lots and lots and lots of videos of the aides doing amazing work with kids and getting them involved. And it's great. And I think empowering all the adults in the system to make the environment more inclusive and help kids connect is super important. But again, you have to have buy-in. And that means that paraeducators on the yard are kind of the lowest man on the totem pole, right? In terms of that hierarchy. So they need reinforcement. They need to be, the pat on the back, like you're doing a good job. And it helps when the principal or assistant principal or even the teacher says that.
I know we have many more questions, but I will just ask one more question because I think is a group of stakeholders we didn't mention, which are families. So what can family do to prepare individual with disability, without disability for inclusion? And another question that came up, and you touched on it a little bit about when we're working towards social norms, how do we define norms and what are norms? So kind of if you can combine this about families and norms, what are we going forward, then this will be the last question for today.
Well, I'd be careful about social norms. Again, look at the playground, watch kids. Kids do all kinds of things. Like the little boy you saw in the sand was a typical kid and he was just playing with the sand. It's okay. He might have needed a moment, but he doesn't have autism. He might have been alone. So again, what are social norms? And the main thing is you want kids to be connected, to have the opportunity to develop a friend, because friends are important, and to be happy and to feel like they belong in that classroom. So again, belongingness, some of these kind of psychological concepts are important. We've also looked at loneliness. Little kids don't really understand loneliness so much. There's no difference that we find between these kids with autism and the typical kids until they get to middle school. So again, things change. So you always want to keep development in perspective. And then for families, families are so anxious about what is happening to their children at school. And I think, we really encourage a communication system between the school and the home. Anything that you use we've had classrooms that we set up in the summer at that school that you saw that was beautiful, right? The lab school, where we had a system, I think we didn't use Parent Square, but one of those, where we would just take pictures of the kids engaged and send it home. And it just relieves the parents' anxiety. Their kids are doing okay. Their kids are happy. Maybe they cry when the parent leaves. 2 seconds later, they're happy, they're engaged, they're doing things, as long as you have a good program. So communication is key. And especially now in the pandemic, where we can't go on campus, we have kids that can't tell their parents about their day. And if the parent has no communication, it's like a black box. You send your kid to school and you have no idea what's going on. That's not okay. We need to have some communication back and forth.
I'll throw in one more head up that seems to come up by several people. And that's really generally, Connie, about acceptance. Kids with and without disabilities, kids from different kinds of families, kids who are non-binary. Would you, especially for our future teachers, what are some strategies or ideas you have that might help them promote accepting classrooms right from the beginning?
You should embrace diversity and differences, and the kids should know that from the beginning and celebrate that. I mean, inclusion for all kids can work, but you really need to have strong people who are advocating for kids, all kids. And acceptance, yeah, I think acceptance is super important, but it's not enough, right? Because you can accept a child in a class and never educate them. And to me, that is not okay. So acceptance and good education is really key. So I hope we're creating really excellent teachers. I have a feeling we are. The people I talked to this morning have it together. So I'm hopeful.
Well, thank you very, very much. And I would like to invite Phil Goldstick to give us a few remarks.
First of all, I want to congratulate you, Dr. Kasari, on presenting a very fine presentation of your work. And it's certainly clear that your studies have had a great breadth and impact. Let me just, for those of you who may not know this, so this program was started because we wanted to figure out how to help people with communication disorders could get help and help their lives and figured out how to work that. And the program here was to have a Goldstick scholar, which Hedda is the current one, and Mickey was the prior one, and Jim Halley was the original one, who were there to do research and recruit the best graduate students for scholarships and fellowships and the lecture. And each lecture has been just fabulous. We're so proud that we were able to continue this and see the great number of students that are out there in the world. And then all of you who are in school right now, you have something to really reach for. And here at the University of Illinois, this program hopefully gives you the opportunity. And opportunity cost in life is one of the big things in business, and in education it applies just as well. I think what really happened here today is the idea of intervention and how it starts, and how the peers and parents play such a fine role, and how the tools that you've learned about here today hopefully will help you in your futures and in your current work to be able to deliver the type of service and get those children to be productive human beings in the world for a future. And one thing everybody is really looking for in life, I think, is a simple word that I believe is to be happy. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the educator is very important. And I don't know if some of you know this, but, you know, I take OSHA courses. In fact, right now I'm taking 2 courses at Northwestern. And there's nothing like having education. And it doesn't stop once you get out of school and once you get into the world. So remember, that's going to be one of the big bases and foundations. And everybody needs a good foundation, just like if you built a building or a house. You know, you want to have a good foundation for the future. So I wish you the best, and very happy and proud of University of Illinois and all the people that we've been connected with that we love. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you everyone again. As we put in the chat, the lecture will be available soon through the college channel. Thank you again for attending. And I would like to thank the Office of Advancement, the IT partners, and of course, Dr. Kasari and the Goldstick family.